The Bible, revered by billions as the infallible Word of God, yet filled with inconsistencies, contradictions, and outright conflicting accounts. For centuries, believers have clung to its pages as a source of truth, while skeptics have pointed out the glaring flaws that undermine its credibility. Today we'll be looking at some of the top contradictions in the Bible, exposing the cracks in the foundation of this so-called holy book. If the Bible claims to be divinely inspired, it shouldn't contradict itself. Yet from conflicting creation stories to contradictory accounts of Judas's death, the inconsistencies pile up. Once you see these contradictions for what they are, you might just question everything you've been told. The Bible wastes no time getting its facts tangled. Right from the start, in the opening chapters of Genesis, we're hit with two completely contradictory versions of how humans were created. In Genesis 1, it's all laid out neatly. Over 6 days, God creates everything: light, sky, land, plants, animals, and finally, humans. On the 6th day, after making all the animals, God creates man and woman simultaneously in his own image. It's a nice, orderly progression: plants first, then animals, and finally humans to cap it all off. Now flip the page to Genesis 2, and suddenly the story shifts. This time, God creates man first, before any plants or animals. Man is made from dust, placed in the Garden of Eden, and then, God goes on to create the animals to keep him company. But none of the animals are quite good enough, so God puts man into a deep sleep, rips out one of his ribs, and uses it to fashion woman as a secondary creation. The order is totally reversed: man first, then plants and animals, and finally woman. These aren't minor details, they're fundamental contradictions in the sequence of creation. How do you reconcile this? You don't. Apologists will try to squirm out of it by claiming these are two complementary perspectives on the same event. But let's be real. Different perspectives don't change the order of events unless you're making excuses for a book that's supposed to be divinely inspired and infallible. If this were a science textbook, nobody would give it a pass for having two incompatible chapters on the origin of life. So why does the Bible, a text billions claim to be the Word of God, get a free pass for messing up its foundational story? If the Bible can't even get its creation story straight in the very first chapters, what does that say about the rest of the book? Simple. If you're looking for consistency, logic, or reliability, you won't find it here. Number 2 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible is the bizarre inconsistency regarding how many animals Noah was supposed to cram onto the ark. You'd think if God gave Noah specific instructions on how to save all life on earth, he'd at least be clear about it. But nope, we get two conflicting sets of instructions in the span of a few verses. In Genesis 6, verse 19 to 20, God tells Noah to bring 2 of every kind of animal onto the ark, 1 male and 1 female. That seems simple enough: 2 by 2, male and female, ensuring each species can reproduce after the flood. This is the version most people know, thanks to countless children's books and Sunday school lessons. But fast forward to Genesis 7, verse 2 to 3, and suddenly the rules change. Now Noah is told to take 7 pairs of clean animals and 2 pairs of unclean animals. 7 pairs? Where did that come from? Not only does this contradict the earlier 2 of each instruction, but it also raises an obvious question. How did Noah, who lived long before the Mosaic law defined clean and unclean animals, even know which animals were clean? This isn't just a minor inconsistency, it's a glaring contradiction that makes it clear these 2 versions of the story came from different sources, likely combined by later editors trying to stitch them into one narrative. The result? A confused mess that leaves anyone reading it wondering which version they're supposed to believe. And of course, apologists have their usual explanations. They'll claim Genesis 6 gives a general instruction, and Genesis 7 provides additional detail. But that excuse doesn't hold water. Genesis 6 explicitly says Noah should take 2 of every kind, period. No mention of 7 pairs, clean animals, or anything else. It's like getting 2 different sets of blueprints for the same building. If they don't match, something's wrong. So what's the takeaway here? If a supposedly omniscient God can't even give consistent instructions for a life-saving mission that's central to the survival of the human race and every species on Earth, what does that say about the reliability of the rest of the Bible? Spoiler alert, not much. Number 3 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible is yet another flood-related blunder. Apparently, God can't even keep his timeline straight when it comes to one of the most famous stories in the Bible. How long did the flood actually last? In Genesis 7 verse 17 it says, "For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth." Simple, right? We all know the classic tale. 40 days and 40 nights of torrential rain, turning the entire world into a giant water park. It's a neat, memorable detail repeated in countless sermons and children's books. But then, just a few verses later, Genesis 7 verse 24 throws a curveball. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Wait, what? So now it's not just 40 days of rain, it's 150 days of flooding? Which is it? Did the flood last for 40 days? Or did the water stay around for 150 days? Apologists love to jump in with creative excuses, claiming that the rain lasted 40 days, but the floodwaters persisted for 150 days. Nice try, but that's not what the text says. Genesis 7:17 doesn't just mention rain, it clearly says the flood itself lasted 40 days. Yet a few lines later, it's suddenly dragging on for 150 days. That's not clarification, that's flat-out contradiction. This isn't a case of poetic storytelling or symbolic numbers. If you're claiming a literal global flood wiped out all life on Earth, the duration matters. You can't just throw in conflicting timelines and expect readers not to notice. Here's the thing. This inconsistency, like many others in Genesis, points to the fact that the flood story likely came from multiple sources, stitched together into one narrative. The result? A patchwork story that can't even agree on something as basic as how long the flood lasted. And if you're thinking, well, maybe it doesn't matter, consider this. If a divinely inspired book can't even maintain internal consistency in one of its foundational stories, how reliable can it really be when it comes to anything else? So, was it 40 days or 150 days? Who knows? But one thing's clear, when it comes to biblical contradictions, the flood story is a gift that keeps on giving. Number 4 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible takes aim at a big one, God's nature. Specifically, can anyone actually see God? The Bible can't seem to make up its mind on this crucial point. First, in Exodus 33:20, God explicitly says, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Pretty straightforward. If you see God, you die. God's holiness is supposedly so overwhelming that mere mortals can't handle it. This is the verse that's often quoted to emphasize God's otherworldly nature. But wait, flip back to Genesis 32:30, and we get something entirely different. Here, Jacob wrestles with a mysterious figure all night, only to realize afterward that it was God. Jacob then says, "I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Hold up. Didn't God just say seeing him would kill you? Yet Jacob not only survives, but claims to have looked God in the face. So which is it? This isn't a trivial detail, it's a core contradiction about God's nature. Apologists will do mental gymnastics to explain this one, often claiming that Jacob didn't literally see God, but instead encountered some kind of angel or divine representative. Others argue that Jacob saw a different aspect of God, whatever that means. But here's the thing. The text plainly says Jacob saw God and lived to tell the tale. It gets better. Exodus 24 verse 9 describes Moses, Aaron, and 70 elders of Israel seeing God and even sharing a meal in his presence. Yet somehow, they also survive. So much for "no one may see me and live." These conflicting accounts reveal a deeper issue. Different parts of the Bible present wildly different conceptions of God. In one version, he's this untouchable, invisible being who can't be approached. In another, he's hanging out with humans, wrestling in the dirt or having dinner. It's as if multiple authors, with different ideas of what God is, contributed to these stories without bothering to make them consistent. And let's not forget the most glaring problem. If God's word is perfect and inspired, why does it contradict itself on something as fundamental as whether people can even look at him? Contradiction 4 leaves us with one conclusion. Either God can be seen, or he can't. But the Bible once again can't seem to decide. Number 5 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible takes us to an outright theological mess. Who incited King David to take a census of Israel? Was it God or was it Satan? You'd think this would be an easy one to get right, but nope. The Bible gives two completely different answers. In 2 Samuel 24:1, it says, "Again the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, 'Go and take a census of Israel and Judah.'" So, according to this account, God was angry and directly caused David to take the census, which later results in a plague that kills 70,000 people. Charming, right? God incites David, punishes Israel for it, and then has David beg for mercy. Classic Old Testament stuff. But hold on. Flip over to 1 Chronicles 21:1 and suddenly the story changes. Here it says Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. Wait a second. Wasn't it God in the previous version? Now it's Satan? Which is it? Did God do it or did Satan do it? Because those are two pretty different motivations, don't you think? Apologists often scramble to explain this one, claiming that God allowed Satan to act as his agent in the second account, but this explanation falls apart on closer inspection. The text in 2 Samuel doesn't mention Satan at all. It directly says God incited David. There's no hint of a third party involved. Meanwhile, 1 Chronicles shifts the blame entirely onto Satan. These are not two complementary perspectives, they're outright contradictions. This also raises another uncomfortable question. Why would God, who supposedly knows everything, deliberately incite David to sin, only to punish him for doing exactly what he was told? If it's Satan's fault, why didn't God intervene before thousands of people died? It's almost as if these stories were written by different authors with wildly different ideas of divine justice, and they never bothered to sync up their narratives. At best, this contradiction reveals sloppy editing. At worst, it shows a complete lack of coherence in the Bible's portrayal of God's character. Is he a just and loving deity, or a capricious figure who manipulates humans into sinning just so he can punish them? Whatever the case, one thing is clear. If the Bible can't even agree on something as basic as whether God or Satan was responsible for a major event, it's hard to take it seriously as a consistent moral guide. Number 6 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible dives into the gruesome end of Judas Iscariot, the infamous betrayer of Jesus. You'd think the Bible could at least be consistent about how this notorious figure met his end, but once again, we get two very different, irreconcilable stories. In Matthew 27 verse 5, we read that Judas, overcome with guilt after betraying Jesus, went away and hanged himself. End of story, right? Not quite, because Acts 1 verse 18 offers a completely different version. Here it says, "With the payment he received for his wickedness, Judas bought a field. There he fell headlong and his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out." Wait a minute. Did Judas hang himself, or did he fall and explode in a field he supposedly bought with his blood money? These aren't two perspectives on the same event. They're two entirely separate, mutually exclusive accounts of his death. Some apologists try to bridge this contradiction with a far-fetched explanation. They suggest Judas hanged himself first, but the rope eventually broke and his body fell and burst open. Creative? Sure. Plausible? Not really. The texts give no indication that these events are connected. They're clearly different stories with different details. Even more bizarre is the mention in Acts that Judas used the money to buy a field. But according to Matthew, Judas didn't keep the money. He threw it back at the chief priests, who then used it to buy the infamous potter's field. So now we have another contradiction. Did Judas buy the field himself, or did the priest buy it after he returned the money? These aren't trivial discrepancies. They expose the fact that the New Testament was written by multiple authors with differing traditions, and later compilers didn't bother to harmonize the contradictions. If the Bible can't even agree on how a central figure like Judas died, how can anyone claim it's a divinely inspired, inerrant document? At the end of the day, whether Judas hanged himself or exploded in a field, what's clear is that biblical authors couldn't get their story straight. And if they can't keep the details of one of the most significant betrayals in history consistent, it begs the question, what else did they get wrong? Number 7 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible is one that hits right at the heart of the New Testament: the genealogy of Jesus. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke both provide detailed family trees for Jesus, but if you line them up side by side, you'll quickly notice something's very wrong. These lineages are completely different. In Matthew chapter 1, Jesus' genealogy is traced through David's son Solomon, leading down through a line of kings to Joseph, Jesus' legal father. It's a royal lineage meant to emphasize Jesus' connection to King David and his right to the throne of Israel. But flip over to Luke chapter 3, and suddenly the genealogy takes a detour. Here Jesus' lineage is traced through David's son Nathan, not Solomon. And instead of kings, we get an entirely different set of ancestors leading all the way to Joseph, who, by the way, isn't even biologically related to Jesus according to Christian doctrine, since Jesus was supposedly born of a virgin. So which one is right? Did Jesus descend from Solomon as Matthew claims, or from Nathan as Luke insists? Apologists often try to wiggle out of this contradiction by arguing that Matthew gives Joseph's lineage while Luke gives Mary's lineage. But this explanation doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Both genealogies explicitly state they are tracing the line of Joseph, not Mary. Worse still, the two genealogies can't even agree on Joseph's father. According to Matthew, Joseph's father was Jacob. But in Luke, Joseph's father is listed as Heli, unless Joseph had two dads, which raises a whole different set of questions. This is yet another blatant contradiction. The fact that the Gospels couldn't even agree on something as foundational as Jesus' family tree speaks volumes about the reliability of the New Testament. If these genealogies were supposed to prove Jesus' legitimacy as the Messiah by showing his descent from David, they failed spectacularly. Instead, they highlight just how inconsistent and contradictory the Bible can be, even when it's trying to establish key theological points. At the end of the day, this isn't just a minor detail, it's a central part of the Christian claim that Jesus fulfilled messianic prophecies. But with two incompatible genealogies, both can't be true. And if they can't even get this right, how can anyone trust the rest of the story? Number 8 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible is a major one, the time of Jesus' birth. You'd think the Gospels could at least agree on when the most important figure in Christianity was born. But nope, we get two conflicting timelines that can't possibly be reconciled. In Matthew chapter 2 verse 1, we're told that Jesus was born during the reign of King Herod. Here's the problem. Herod died in 4 BCE. So according to Matthew, Jesus had to have been born sometime before 4 BCE because Herod plays a big role in the story, including the infamous massacre of the innocents. Now let's jump to Luke chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, which gives us a completely different timeline. According to Luke, Jesus was born during the census conducted by Quirinius, the governor of Syria. Here's the kicker. Historical records show that Quirinius didn't become governor and conduct his census until 6 CE, a full 10 years after Herod's death. So, was Jesus born before 4 BCE when Herod was alive, or after 6 CE when Quirinius conducted his census? These two timelines are separated by a decade, and both can't be true. No amount of theological hand-waving can fix this glaring contradiction. Apologists have tried all sorts of mental gymnastics to resolve this one. Some claim Luke's reference to the census is metaphorical, or that there was an earlier, unrecorded census under Quirinius. But these explanations don't hold up against actual history. The Romans were meticulous record keepers, and there's zero evidence of any earlier census during Herod's reign. Others try to argue that Luke simply got the dates wrong, which raises an obvious question. If Luke can't even get basic historical facts right, why should we trust anything else in his gospel? This contradiction is a serious problem for anyone claiming the Bible is historically accurate or divinely inspired. If the authors couldn't even agree on something as basic as when Jesus was born, it casts doubt on the entire narrative. Was Jesus born during Herod's reign or during Quirinius's census? The Bible can't seem to decide, and that's a problem. In the end, whether it's 4 BCE or 6 CE, what's clear is that biblical authors were less concerned with historical accuracy and more focused on spinning their own theological tales. And if they couldn't nail down the timeline of Jesus' birth, what else did they get wrong? Number 9 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible is another gem from the story of Judas Iscariot, this time about the infamous potter's field, bought with the blood money Judas received for betraying Jesus. The only problem? The Bible can't agree on who actually bought the field. In Matthew chapter 27 verses 6 and 7, we're told that after Judas threw the 30 pieces of silver back at the chief priests, they said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money." So they took the money and used it to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. Simple enough, the priests bought the field, and Judas had nothing to do with it beyond returning the money. Now flip to Acts chapter 1 verse 18 and suddenly we get a totally different story. Here Luke writes, with the payment he received for his wickedness, Judas bought a field. There he fell headlong, his body burst open and all his intestines spilled out. Wait, what? In this version, Judas himself buys the field, not the priests. How exactly does a dead man go out and buy real estate after throwing away the money? This isn't a minor discrepancy, it's a glaring contradiction. Either Judas bought the field, or the priest did. Both can't be true. Apologists will try to claim that Judas indirectly bought the field by returning the money, which the priests then used to make the purchase. But that's not what Acts says. It explicitly states that Judas bought the field with the money, not that the priests acted on his behalf. And let's not forget the added absurdity of Judas's death. In Matthew, he hangs himself. In Acts, he falls head first, and his body bursts open. So not only can't the Bible decide who bought the field, but it also can't agree on how Judas met his grisly end. This contradiction exposes a deeper problem. The Gospels and Acts weren't written by people collaborating to tell one consistent story. They were written by different authors with different agendas and sources. The result? Conflicting accounts that make it impossible to pin down what actually happened. So who bought the potter's field? According to Matthew, it was the priests. According to Acts, it was Judas. But if the Bible can't even get something as basic as a real estate transaction straight, how can it possibly be trusted to deliver absolute truth? Number 10 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible involves one of King David's elite warriors, Josheb-Basshebeth, also known as Jashobeam, because why have one name when you can have two? The Bible gives us two accounts of this mighty warrior's exploits, and surprise, they don't match. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 8, it says, "These are the names of David's mighty warriors. Josheb-Basshebeth, a Tahkemonite, was chief of the three. He raised his spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter." Impressive, right? One man kills 800 soldiers in a single battle. Superhuman, sure, but it makes for a great heroic tale. Now flip over to 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 11, and suddenly the story changes. This is the list of David's mighty warriors. Jashobeam, a Tahkemonite, was chief of the officers. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Hold on. 300 men? That's a far cry from the 800 mentioned in Samuel. So, which is it, 800 dead or 300 dead? Unless the author of Chronicles forgot to carry a 5 in his calculations, this is a blatant numerical contradiction. It's not like we're dealing with an off-by-1 error here. The difference is a whopping 500 men. That's not a rounding mistake. That's a totally different story. Apologists might argue that these are two separate events, but that explanation falls flat. Both accounts are describing the exact same warrior performing the exact same feat, raising his spear and killing an absurd number of enemies in a single encounter. It's clearly meant to be the same story, just told differently by two authors who couldn't agree on the details. This contradiction highlights a broader issue with the Bible's historical reliability. If even basic battle statistics can't be trusted, something you'd expect to be pretty consistent, what does that say about the rest of the so-called historical narrative? It's obvious that the authors of Samuel and Chronicles were working from different traditions or sources, and rather than reconciling the numbers, they each ran with their own version. The result? A glaring contradiction that makes you question whether these stories were ever meant to be taken as literal history in the first place. So, was it 800 or 300? The Bible can't seem to decide. But one thing's for sure. If you're looking for factual consistency, you won't find it here. Number 11 on our list of top contradictions in the Bible revisits the tale of David's census, but this time we're focusing on who was responsible for inciting David to commit this so-called sin. If you've read the Bible, you'll know it can't seem to decide whether the blame lies with God or Satan. In 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 1, it says, "Again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, 'Go and take a census of Israel and Judah.'" According to this version, God was angry at Israel, so he stirred up David to take a census. Then, after David follows orders, God punishes him by killing 70,000 innocent Israelites with a plague. Talk about divine overkill. And now we turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 21 verse 1, and suddenly the story shifts. Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. Wait, what? So now it's Satan doing the inciting? How does that work? Did God wake up one day and hand off his wrath duties to Satan? Or did the chronicler just rewrite the story to make God look better? This isn't a minor discrepancy, it's a fundamental contradiction about who caused the entire event. In Samuel, God is directly responsible for inciting David. In Chronicles, it's Satan's doing. These two versions can't both be true unless you're willing to twist logic into a theological pretzel. And here's where things get even messier. If we take the Samuel version at face value, it paints a picture of a God who incites someone to sin, only to turn around and punish them for it. That's not justice, that's entrapment. On the other hand, if we take the Chronicles version, we're left wondering how Satan, supposedly a rebellious fallen angel, has the authority to incite a king unless God allows it. Apologists love to claim that this is just a case of God allowing Satan to act as his agent, but that's not what the texts say. Samuel explicitly states that it was God's anger that led to the census, while Chronicles places the blame squarely on Satan. No amount of theological hand-waving can change the fact that these are two contradictory stories. So who really incited David? Was it God, in a fit of divine rage, or was it Satan, the cosmic scapegoat? The Bible can't seem to make up its mind, leaving us with yet another contradiction that exposes the inconsistency of its supposed divine inspiration. If you enjoy our content, we'd love your support. By joining one of our channel memberships, you help us continue creating videos like this one while gaining access to some amazing perks. As a member, you'll unlock exclusive content available only to supporters, earn loyalty badges to show off in comments and live chats, and enjoy priority responses to your comments, shoutouts, and more. The best part? Memberships start at just $2.99 a month, less than a cup of coffee. Even small contributions make a big difference for the PJ Bible TV team in covering production costs and delivering the content you love. And if you're not ready to become a channel member today but still want to support us, there are other ways to help. Engaging with our videos is a tremendous way to show your support. By taking just a few moments to like the video, share it with friends, family, or on social media, and leave a comment, you're telling the YouTube algorithm to share our content with more people. Your support, no matter how you choose to show it, means the world to us. Thank you for being part of the PJ Bible TV community.